Of course I knew where to find him that night. I'd been there several times before. I met the centurion at the east gate, and we walked down through the valley of the Kidron, and then up toward lonely Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives. It wasn't far. He made more noise than I wanted. The armor, it rattled. When we got there, it was much as I had expected, except for one thing. The disciples. They slept. They slept. Jesus was so deep in prayer, he was surrounded before anyone realized what was going on. There was confusion at first, then fear, and then horror when they realized who it was. I went to Jesus and I said, "Greetings, Master," and I kissed him. That's what I did. Surprised? No, I wouldn't say surprised. I'd say he was more disappointed. Peter drew his sword. There was a hint of violence. James and some of the others, they dove into the bushes. But really, it was so simple and quick. We went up. I kissed him. He was bound. And we went back down toward the east gate. You never quite get over it, do you? After all these years, some 20 centuries now, you still don't know what to do with me. I am a thorn in the side of the Christian conscience. You know, once my name was common. In Judea it was honored. A firstborn son would proudly be named Judas. But now, who would name their dog Judas? Where people know my name, my story is reserved for traitors. I raised doubts and many scandalous questions, like, if Jesus was so good, how come this disciple was disloyal? Or if Jesus was so wise, how could he choose a traitor? How could I have done it? Why did I do it? Did I do it? Some Christians like to believe that Jesus knew all along that I would betray him, while others believe my betrayal was invented. After all, we need to have villains, don't we? Circumstances don't provide one, well, then you just invent one. When it comes to evil, you Christians can be so naive. How easily good is betrayed by a friend, and with a kiss. We seldom talk about how much outrage Jesus caused. I was never comfortable with tax collectors. Roman collaborators. They're more like your mafia than anything else. I had an easier time with the women. Jesus would sit around the table with them, with all of us, and talk all through the night. Many who followed him were from outside Torah. It's no wonder the scribes would ask us constantly, why? Why do you eat with traitors and with prostitutes? We were a ragged bunch. Many of us were fishermen, a few of us were poets. All of us were dreamers. And then there were the women. Bias has buried their names. I kept track of the money. That's right, the money. It was just as important for us as it is for you. Where did it come from? Well, it's in your own book. It's just overlooked. Those women who traveled with us, well, there were many of them, and they helped to finance our group. So you may ask, what kind of a wild madman betrays his friend with a kiss? Well, let me tell you, I wasn't so different than the others. I too left my livelihood to follow him, that there are good things to say about Judas. God knows I had more credentials than someone who fished for a living. Didn't take me long to get to the inner circle. Jesus could see my potential, my passion for Israel, my love of adventure. They made me treasurer. I bought the provisions for all of us. I was certainly the best businessman in the bunch. But we're still left with this. How does someone with so much potential, so much promise, sink so low? Money. You always say it's about the money, that every person has their price. And I think to myself how easily one generation smears another with its own sin. 30 pieces of silver, would that be enough for you? And would such a small sum explain my remorse or my suicide? It's hardly enough to buy a slave. And let me tell you, when I held those coins in my hand, they burned my flesh. They seared my conscience. They made me question everything about my life. I tried to give them back. If only evil could be so easily canceled. Pilate was able to cancel his bargain, to wash his hands, but I couldn't abandon mine. I even brought those coins back to the temple, and I threw them on the floor. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They were so appalled at what I'd done, and I just realized to myself, oh, how quickly money changes color. The same funds that bought my deed, as soon as that deed was done, oh, they become blood money, no longer fit for the temple treasury. So money does not explain Judas Iscariot. Now, some people say, oh, resentment fueled by my betrayal. That I was angry at Jesus when he rebuked me because of that woman, the one that used that expensive ointment to anoint his feet. And yes, I thought it should have been sold and the money given to the poor. And yes, he did rebuke me. But I was never rebuked as often as Peter. Some say that since I was the only disciple from the south, the hill country of Judea, that I had different customs, maybe a different accent, that I stood out like a hillbilly at the opera. But let's not forget this. They respected Judas. So resentment? Nothing more than speculation. Others say that I alone knew that it was over. I could tell that Jesus had failed and that the authorities were coming down to crack down on us, to destroy our whole crazy plan. And so in an act of desperation, I threw the whole cause overboard. Cowardice, they say. But come on. Does a coward have the unmitigated gall to do something so unthinkable as to go seek out the temple authorities, to walk into their sanctuary and to sell one's leader? And besides, who was it that dove into the bushes after we arrived? So what explains Judas? Well, some have understood that I was a revolutionary. I wanted to reestablish the integrity of Israel, to cast off Rome, to have our own land again. I was impatient because Jesus seemed to be wasting so much time. All these critical moments to gain popular support and confront Rome were just passing us by. So I wanted to force his hand. He promised us a kingdom, didn't he? I envisioned myself as chief warrior. I was just itching to do unto those Romans what they did unto us. But Jesus did not seek my kind of kingdom. It wasn't from Rome he wanted to save us. Jesus' kingdom was of the heart. He would have saved us from ourselves. So my heart grew bitter. He spends all his time with prostitutes and tax collectors, the pathetic and the maimed. My king goes on soothing minds and healing bodies while the world around us is collapsing. Jesus was the only one who could free us from Rome. And all he had to do was say the word, and we would have been right there with him. But he never did. Anytime it got dangerous, or it looked like someone might get hurt, he backed off. But seriously, how does anything ever change? Finally, I had to take matters into my own hands. Who can explain it, really? Pick a motive, whichever one suits you. They're all slippery. Money, resentment, ethnic distance, that I was a revolutionary. You're always looking for a reason, but reasons seldom explain anything. I stick out like a thorn in the side of your gospel, an ugly element in an otherwise mighty message. So just let it go with this. I represent the capacity that each of us has all of the time to commit evil. What? Are there some of you who hold yourselves morally beyond betrayal? You say to yourselves, well, I never would have betrayed Jesus. Well, let me tell you, Peter thought that too. I think those that know their own potential for evil are better protected. God save us from the righteous ones in our midst, the ones so convinced of their own goodness. They're the dangerous ones. So please, whenever you worship, say your confession, because possibilities for evil are kissing cousins to prospects for good. And don't pursue knowledge or ask science to deliver you from evil. Science is ethically neutral, and knowledge can only get you so far. I think many of us would admit that the only thing worse than a devil is an educated devil. No. Jesus taught you to pray, "Thy will be done. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver me from evil." That's right. Say me. Forget that polite and vague way we have of saying us. It's me. Anyone with high motive and noble purpose can fall in an instant. Each of us is responsible for our decisions and our choices. We all have the gift and the curse of free will. I know this better than anyone. Now, some of you would probably like to wipe me clear from the record, so that the slate would be cleaned of Judas. When I go into your churches, so often I see stained glass representations of 11 apostles, but seldom the 12. How come? Why? Why leave me out? You can't ignore me. I'm always a part of you. Let this be remembered. God is not mocked. Those 30 pieces of silver, the ones I cast on the floor of the temple, what became of them? Well, they were used to buy a field, a worthless plot of ground that nobody wanted. It was called Hakeldama, which means potter's field. And what was that field used for? To bury paupers, aliens, those with no name, the ones that nobody wanted. How appropriate. The same money that bought my deed was used for a field in which forgotten, discarded, ignored human beings are laid to rest under the auspices of God. Even my end has poetic power and a mighty message. No evil is so perverse as to be utterly beyond God's love. You see, God is not mocked. Not by you, and not by Judas. Amen.